participants from last night's meeting, an important meeting when it comes to Florida and Michigan and whether or not they will have primaries or caucuses. Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz is a Hillary Clinton supporter. She's in Fort Lauderdale tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, Congresswoman. I want to start off by asking you, what came out of that meeting yesterday? Are you any closer to any kind of decisions about what you're going to do in Florida?
Well, a couple of things came out of the meeting. The Democratic members of Congress from Michigan and Florida feel very strongly that we need to make sure that we continue to fight to ensure that Florida and Michigan's delegations are seated at the Democratic National Convention. And the bottom line is that the nominee for the Democratic Party for President of the United States should be chosen by voters in all 50 states. We have full consensus on that. And we also talked about the variety of possibilities that we could help pull together and try to reach some kind of compromise. We have Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton supporters among my colleagues in Michigan and Florida, and we're committed to trying to find a solution to this.
Well, let's listen to what the DNC chairman, Howard Dean, said to our own John Roberts earlier in the day about some of the options and actually, quite frankly, some of the consequences that Florida voters will be dealt with. Let's take a listen.
The fact of the matter is you cannot violate the rules of a process and then expect to get forgiven for it. We've got to play by the rules. If you don't do that, then the half of the people in the Democratic Party whose candidate doesn't win this nomination are going to go away believing they've been cheated. I've got to run a process where everybody believes this is an honest result, and the only way to do that is to stick to the rules that were agreed to by everybody at the beginning.
Doesn't he have a point here?
You know, we have some pretty raw nerves here 8 years after the presidential election of 2000 in Florida. The recount, we still feel the sting from it. We had 1.75 million Democratic voters go to the polls on January 29th, and Florida voters feel strongly that our votes should count and that our delegation should be seated at the convention. And the reason we had that meeting last night, Suzanne, is so that we can bring the leaders of the Democratic Party, elected and party leaders, together to try to come up with a solution instead of continuing to stamp feet and insist that rules were broken. We need to make sure that we elect a president of the United States, a Democratic president of the United States, so we can move this country in a new direction and focus on the issues that matter to people, like expanding access to health care and improving the quality of education and getting us out of this war in Iraq. And all of this talk about the rules and that kind of thing is counterproductive to that ultimate goal.
But Congresswoman, why weren't these discussions happening 6 months ago? Why the timing of all of this?
Been.
Because it looks suspicious when people say, okay, well, you're a Clinton supporter. You look at somebody else who's a supporter with Barack Obama. Nobody wants to be disenfranchised. But wasn't this something that could have been worked out before? Answer those who look at this and say, well, perhaps this is politically motivated.
Suzanne, I've been watching your coverage of this the entire election cycle, and I mean, you know especially that we, as Florida members of Congress, have been fighting to ensure that we have a delegation seated at the convention since the Florida legislature was debating whether or not to move our primary. I mean, the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee threatened Florida and Michigan that they would not seat our delegations back when this was being debated in the legislature over a year ago. What people have to keep in mind is that it is the Republican-led legislature in Florida that changed the date of this primary, and then the Democratic National Committee that penalized Florida for an action that was led by Republicans. We have been fighting every single day for months to make sure that our delegations are seated. This is before many of us even got involved in the presidential election. So there's nothing, in terms of our motivation for wanting to get our delegations seated, there's no partisan in terms of a candidate's motivation behind it. We've been fighting the whole way, both Obama and Clinton supporters from Florida.
We'll have to leave it there. Congressman Wasserman Schultz, thank you so much for joining us. And